newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record about some charming people I have known. For I meet politicians and grafters by the score, killers plain and fancy, it's really quite a bore. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. They wallow in corruption, crime and gore. Ting-a-ling-ling, city desk, full the press, extra, extra, read all about it, it's a mess, meets the test. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. It's wonderful to represent the press.
So if we're going to do a radio show, let's introduce ourselves to each other, okay? Tell us who you are, right?
So I'm Judy Patrick, a longtime newspaper editor for a small daily newspaper, and now
it's not small.
Well,
what is it, a secret?
It's true. Oh, the Daily Gazette in Schenectady. I'm very proud to have worked in Schenectady for many years, love Schenectady, and now I work for the New York Press Association trying to save local journalism.
Good.
I want to continue to do that.
I think you should continue to do that.
Hi,
okay.
this is Barbara Lombardo. I was the executive editor of a truly small local newspaper, the Saratogian, and now I teach journalism at University at Albany. The day of the taping is our first class of the semester.
Oh, excellent. How about that?
No wonder you're dressed up.
Yeah, how about that? Looks like a professor. A fine, small local newspaper, I might add. How about that, sir?
I hope it goes as well as my first day did yesterday, Wednesday, as we're speaking on a Thursday, Barbara, because I also teach at UAlbany, and of course I'm the very humble producer of this wonderful program at WAMC, host Morning Edition and produce other programs. And
David Gestina by name. I just want to point out you haven't identified
No, he didn't do that. You think a radio guy would know that.
You would think, yeah. Thank you, David. We've had enough.
Can we pause for a moment?
I'm Rex Smith.
Hang on, I'll edit that part out. And I'm David Gestina.
All right, I'm Rex Smith, former editor of the Times Union, and now I write the Upstate American, which is published by Substack. So we are here to talk about what's going on in the media. That's what we do every week on this program. We have about a half hour to look at some decision-making that's going on in newsrooms and how journalism turns out. But we have to start with the weather. Don't you think? We talk about the fact it's been cold in the Northeast. It's been cold in the South. But notwithstanding that, one morning, David, you were pointing out that on the coldest day of the year so far, minus 10 in Albany, there was a poor reporter doing a stand-up at 5 a.m. in front of a business where people come to play video games together. What's your point?
What's their point? In other words, this is a common tactic in television news, especially local television news. You got to have the stand-up. It's going to be live, local, and late breaking. You need to be on the scene. You need to have reporters standing there. And we've already seen, and we've already talked about how the Weather Channel likes to put their reporters in the middle of a hurricane.
Yeah.
And, that can be dangerous, obviously. And we're just waiting for one day someone gets blown away or hit by an object. Now, in this case, you have dangerous cold. We're warning people to stay inside, that it's dangerous out. And this local station sends out their reporter, young person, standing in minus 10 below in front of a darkened building. There's nothing going on there now, so there's nothing live and late breaking. If anything, they're past the time they should be there. And they're talking about this new business. I'm questioning whether that is a smart move to send your employee into a dangerous situation when there's no news value to that.
You're not questioning it. We all agree. I think we all agree. It's really a dumb management decision.
It's showbiz.
Right, it's theater. And in fact, it's theater when on a perfectly calm summer day when they're standing in front of the state capitol and saying that this legislation was passed today or this protest happened today. When the protesters are long gone, the legislators are long gone, it's just theater. And is it a good use of their personnel? I mean, we're not TV news people. We are consumers of that news, but we have enough common sense to know that the people have gone from the building, that it's dangerous to be out in the cold, and that they're not conveying the information. As long as we're on this, can I say that I hate it when the weather person tells me whether or not to bring an umbrella? I am old enough to know whether or not I need a big coat or an umbrella or my galoshes. So it's like, just give me the weather. Don't tell me how to dress.
Oh, they're trying to be cute and they're trying to be personal.
Speaking of dressing, doesn't it bother you that the young women on the set now have to wear tight short dresses that are sleeveless, right? Why is that the costume for women when men have to wear jackets and ties on set?
It drives me crazy. It's driven me crazy for years. Like you'll see it now. For many years, I thought maybe it's just hot in those studios.
No, they're chilly, as a matter of fact. I mean, I was just on a morning program where I watched this. I was chilly in the studio, and this poor young woman who was interviewing me was sitting there in a sleeveless outfit.
And did she say that she was expected to do so by her bosses?
I did not inquire.
So we don't know whether it's an assumption that they do or whether it's a directive, which
Now,
either way she shouldn't
having
have to do
beaten up on television news now, let us
can I
do...
say one more thing about
please.
it?
Yes, I was
So
going
not quite done.
say
I think
something.
it's a lack of
Not quite done.
a lack of imagination of management, because you definitely have to have some visual in TV. If it was just radio and you're talking about the wind, you might want something behind. But you need a visual. So even my husband, not knowing that we were going to possibly talk about this at all today, mentioned that he was watching television news and they were in Davos, Switzerland, for the global leaders meeting. And they had the people who were the commentators outside, where it was really cold and they were all bundled up, but you could see the beautiful mountains in the background. And like, wasn't it dopey that they had to be out there? But it did look pretty.
Well, it keeps your attention.
It's not dangerous,
Having
though.
beaten up on television news, though, let us say that there are really moments where television news has distinguished itself, especially lately. The wildfires in California, if you talk to people in L.A., they're tuned in constantly to their local TV stations because, you're right, David, you don't want to put reporters in harm's way, but they are able to, with drones now and with reporters somewhat off to the side, they're actually able to show where the fires are spreading so that people can have the warning
Well,
they
and
need.
as I said, there's no news value when there's a darkened building. It doesn't.
Right.
There's nothing there that's explanatory of the story except just what Barbara was mentioning, which I would just call laziness. You're not coming up with a different way to tell that story, so you don't endanger your reporter. But to show those fires, you need someone there with the camera. You need to be there, and that information is going to help save lives, help people get evacuated. Nothing that young reporter did in the morning in front of a gaming business is doing any of that.
Yeah, absolutely so. But we sit here as non-video professionals, actually. And so if you folks listening are interested in having your point of view about how television news operates, media@wamc.org is where you can send an email. And we're always happy to hear from you, and you can give us your ideas on what we ought to be talking about here.
Yeah,
as a matter of fact.
educate us.
Do that, please. As the Biden administration was leaving office, the outgoing Democratic chair of the Federal Communications Commission rejected what she described as 4 efforts to weaponize the government's TV licensing authority because she dismissed pending petitions. Basically, there were 3 of them put forward by Trump officials attacking the licenses of news organizations that had reported about January 6th. The new head of the FCC under Donald Trump has just reinstated the complaints, indicating that the FCC is now going to investigate the licenses of broadcast outlets because of the nature of their reporting. This strikes me as an abuse of power, to put it mildly, and I wonder if this is going to have, though, a chilling effect on any media outlets that are licensed by the FCC, to know that they may well be under scrutiny by the commission that enables them to stay on the air. And if you were running an organization, wouldn't you say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be quite so harshly critical?
I say it's already having a chilling effect. We're seeing it on the national level for sure. And when you use the Federal Communication Commission as a hammer for your enemies, those that you perceive are not telling the news the way you want to hear it, you can see where this is all going to lead. And then one other thing that's tangentially related, which is we talk a lot about President Trump and his lies, but he also tells us what he's going to do at the same time. So mixed in with those lies is some truth, which is he told us he's going to go after the press, and he is.
Right, and we should acknowledge how important the FCC is to the functioning of broadcast facilities. I mean, this is not an idle threat. This is not a harmless endeavor on the administration's part. This is very important. And then you're also seeing this week calls for the media organizations that amplified any negative coverage of Donald Trump, including the Episcopalian bishop who criticized him, or he didn't criticize him.
She did not criticize him.
Not.
She looked at him and called for compassion.
Right, and so you're hearing calls from some members of Congress to investigate those media organizations. This is a crazy time, and it's just the beginning. We need to be here. We need to stand up for the right of the press to report on the news.
This is Marjorie Taylor Greene, right, the congresswoman who is saying investigate the media for reporting about the bishop. But surely even Marjorie Taylor Greene, given her, Shirley, don't call me Shirley, notwithstanding her obvious mental deficiency, is aware of the fact that will not withstand First Amendment scrutiny. But she is looking for the attention, right?
She is looking for the attention, but for a lot of these things, what they want to do is, again, tamp down any kind of information. It makes you think twice. It's a throwing cold water on any efforts to be critical of the new president. And
it only takes a complaint from someone in the audience, and you're putting the information out there that you're ready to accept those complaints that are filed to the FCC. Then you start an investigation. And again, we're down to what we talk about with newspapers and the problem with getting sued in a newspaper. Do you have the funds? Can you survive accusation from a listener that you violated the public's trust?
Hey, I can see a congressional committee hauling down publishers of major newspapers for a hearing. It's one of my worst case scenarios, but I think it could happen.
I think it really is something that could happen, and it is scary. The president's executive order regarding the press, just the title of it strikes fear in my heart, and it reminds me of how important the choice of words are and how different things can be. It's said and interpreted in different ways. His order is called Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship, as if that is what he is going to do or that is what is happening. And within that executive order, it's stated that over the last 4 years, the previous administration trampled free speech rights by censoring American speech on online platforms, which is maybe one way of looking at it, or it could be that there were efforts to keep disinformation from being accepted as fact.
You know,
they're protecting disinformation.
Actually, I have to say I have in front of me a wonderful quotation that I love from George Orwell, who wrote this essay in 1946, I think, Politics in the English Language. He wrote, "Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind." And that's exactly what that Trump order was doing. It was actually reversing the reality of language to make restrictions seem to be freedom.
I feel like it's, Bizarro Superman. Remember Bizarro Superman was the opposite of all good?
Yeah.
And it was Bizarro Super. That's what that is. That's a Bizarro free speech directive.
Right, you needed Mr. Mixia's Pitalik.
Nice, Barbara.
Now, tell me, if you were the editor whose reporter was covering that speech by Elon Musk, where he made this gesture, what do you think about the description of that? Would you say that your reporter should report that Elon Musk gave a Nazi salute twice?
No, but you need to say in the story that he made a gesture that looked like the Nazi salute. And first of all, you would need to talk to Musk or their spokespeople about, jeepers, that looked like a Nazi salute. What was intended? So you need something in that initial story to either say efforts to talk to him about it were unsuccessful or whatever, to have him clarify it. You could also have pretty quickly gone on to the internet to see how nationalist far-right groups said, yay, look what he's done. That's great.
They did.
Right. So that could be part of the reporting, so that whether it was intended or not, you'd have to carefully craft your writing to say that we don't know that he was intending to do it, but it certainly was interpreted by that.
But doesn't all that good journalism that Barbara's describing, that we should be doing and that people should be recognizing and listening and reading, get thrown out of the window when you have social media memes that just show him over and over, repeat this gesture over and over with the suggestion that it is the Nazi salute, whether it is or it isn't, really has this debilitating effect on all this in-depth coverage that we're doing.
That's exactly right, David. I mean, I think that's an important point, that what Barbara is describing is actually good journalism. That is to be descriptive rather than to label things, to give people a sense of what actually happened with detail rather than the lazy way of
Nuance.
characterizing it. But that notion is attacked, really, by the reality of the way information spreads now, that the memes overpower the thoughtful journalism, which is where we find ourselves in trouble all the time.
Right, and Musk had an opportunity to respond by saying that certainly wasn't intended, but instead unless his responses were taken out of context and cut really short, he could have said it wasn't intended, but all I heard was, get a life.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. And then now what I'm seeing are doctored images, for example, of Taylor Swift making the same image. Not true. The video has been manipulated. She did not do that, but they're all over social media. It's often attributed to the fact that Musk says he's on the spectrum, that he does goofy things. But anyone who deals with people on the spectrum will they teach people not to do awkward things like that. I mean, he revels in it. I think he is trying to cause this kind of controversy, this kind of attention, and I think the stories that have been good about this have talked about that. And they've also gone to European residents and say, what do you think about this? And people more familiar with the Nazi salute are concerned about this.
Where it's illegal in Germany and
Yes,
other places.
the British talk show broadcaster named James O'Brien said anybody who says that's not what Musk was doing must go do it in Germany and see what happens. Or why don't you do it at parent night the next time you're at your kid's school and just see what happens?
Well, there was a commentator who wrote an opinion piece about it who had an experience similar to an experience that I had earlier this year. I was at a march in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment being passed in New York State, and we had speakers who were inspiring the crowd in the park, and it was like, are we going to fight for this? And myself and others just kind of spontaneously raised our arm in yeah, we're for this. But if someone had taken a still picture, and I thought this as I did it, oh, wait a minute, I pulled my arm down, that nobody was going to misinterpret that was happening at that event. But certainly it could look like that without meaning to.
There's been some criticism of the press for not covering this enough. Although I have seen a lot of stories about it and a lot of coverage, but you are from, especially the liberal side of social media, will say, why isn't the press covering this? Why are they overlooking this? Why aren't they holding him accountable for this?
Well, one of the important things that we teach young journalists is to put things in context. And the reason that this has resonance and the reason why you're hearing critiques that there hasn't been enough said about this is because in the context of what Donald Trump has done, this has power. Donald Trump has at least 15 times made separate calls to revoke broadcast licenses. He has vowed to investigate media outlets that are critical of him. He's insulted or threatened journalists hundreds of times in the campaign trail. His alliance with Musk, he's threatened Mark Zuckerberg, apparently successfully, to get him to extract concessions on content moderation.
And all these moguls were there in more prime positions than senators at the inaugural. What a visual that was.
Absolutely. And so in this context, when someone is offering what looks to be a Nazi salute, or when someone is doing something that appears to be aimed at stifling freedom of the press, that is trying to stop people, that's the context in which this develops. And that's why it's not just joking. It's not just casual when we see this. The context matters.
And people are forgetting, I think, or maybe they don't even realize it, that the reason there is something called journalism is so that there is something called a democracy. We cannot have a democracy if you don't have a free flow of trustworthy, verifiable information that we can all make decisions about.
What do you think about this? Donald Trump is installing to head the organization that runs Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe, and so on. He's installing someone who has made clear that he's going to turn this essentially into a propaganda organ. That's what Trump has said. Is that a good idea or not? Now, these outlets have traditionally been straightforward reporting, trying to give the rest of the world a sense of America's commitment to the First Amendment. But I think that the argument on the other side, the conservative argument, is we need to be doing as Americans the same thing that other countries are doing, that we need to be putting forward the American story and not have the American government funding anything that speaks of dissent in our country. Is that a fair assessment? Did I line these up right? And are we doing the right thing then by saying, yeah, maybe Radio Free Europe ought to be a bit more propaganda-oriented?
Right. I've been watching their coverage for the last 6 months because I've been worried about this, and they do play it pretty strictly down the middle. You will get critical coverage of the U.S. government as well as positive coverage. You get a regular, it's almost like the Associated Press, although far more limited. I do not believe in propaganda because eventually the credibility of what it stands for erodes. You can only do that for so long when people begin to see that you can't trust it. One of the values of Voice of America has been that it is a credible source. So ruin that, you'll ruin it forever. And you know what? You're not going to just ruin it for this term. You'll ruin it forever.
One of the things that I think we have to hold to is, David, you circulated an article suggesting that we talk about how to cover stupidity. Maybe I put this in the wrong context. I shouldn't be switching to this so quickly here, but there is an Italian writer who distinguishes between the unconscious ignorance and conscious ignorance. Unconscious ignorance is dangerous to democracy because it combines a lack of knowledge with arrogant belief that one already knows enough. And I'm afraid that we are actually moving toward a society that has no respect for learning, for science, and instead embraces unconscious ignorance.
That's a different kind of ignorance, I think, than what can naturally happen to a human being as they get older and they get successful and they think they've figured everything out and they don't need to learn anything new. That's different because those people were probably learning a lot of that stuff based on valuable, verifiable information, whereas now we've got an ignorance based completely on not only clinging to an ideology that has no basis in fact, but that is tearing at the very fabric of our ability to communicate with each other in a truthful way.
You know, as a journalist, you make an important point. I think that humility, knowing what we don't know, is an important skill for journalists, right? To be able to say, I'm entering this as a naive person, really, and educate me. And that's what makes reporting somewhat difficult because you need both that fundamental humility about what you don't know in order to hear what you need to know to report, but you also need to have the confidence then to plunge forward with your reporting.
Yes, and you need the support of your editors and managers to include those things in your coverage. And some of it could be simplified, but maybe because I'm just stupid, misinformation versus disinformation, and that people have to be careful about misinformation that they're spreading unwittingly as opposed to disinformation that is intentionally spreading untruths. The result is the same at the end for either one, and that's concerning. But you talk about understanding the background of something, understanding the context. You need to be able to explain that in virtually every story, some stories, almost every story, or else you're helping stupidity reign.
Yeah, the stubborn ignorance has always been around to some degree, but I think social media, again, let's blame them. They exacerbate it because you double down on the ignorance and you fail to open up your mind to the possibility that you might be wrong or you want to learn more.
Well, but how about this? Haven't all of our memories been weakened? Because now all the kids have to do is go to Google. No, but seriously, if you just go to Google, you just can worry about it later or look it up when you want to. You have that in your hand on your phone. So why do I need to go into any depth? Why do I need to memorize that poem or that speech? Where we were always required to do memorization in school, and we had to carry it forward. We didn't have something that could tell us so that we could unburden our mind.
I'm okay with having something that I could look up because my mind is full, not necessarily with great stuff, but it's pretty full. So I'm glad to be able to look up stuff, and I think that's a great thing, but I have to be able to trust what I'm looking up.
True confession time. I write with a thesaurus open so that I can draw out better words than I actually am able to summon through my mind. This is just a little writing tip to people. Keep a good thesaurus available. Actually, there's one
do that too
online, which you can get, which is synonyms. But a good thesaurus actually helps to stimulate ideas, broadening your reach. And
you mean you don't just ask AI to write your column?
Well, actually, I had my first experience last week at a not-for-profit board meeting where the AI function on Zoom took notes, and it was remarkable. The minutes of the meeting were really quite wonderful, as done by AI.
Really?
So, yes, it was really, and it precisely tracked who said what.
And it got the names right and the spellings?
Mm-hmm.
And how did the AI thing vote?
Yeah, it's really an interesting thing, and I think we will see more of that. But for decades now, I've actually had this science fiction notion that we're going to, the same way that we embed chips in our pets, we're going to have chips embedded so that they will tell us, for example, we won't have to remember, oh, that's Judy when I see your face. It'll actually have a display that'll come up.
Well, not only that, but when more information comes out, you just plug in a little wire and it uploads.
Absolutely.
You know, you got the latest and the greatest from science or the arts or whatever you need.
You know, I mean,
Google Glasses, that didn't last too long.
We
but
are
remember,
going far afield here.
This is going to replace journalism, though. People will have at their, not only at their fingertips, but they will almost imbue information by digital means.
But is it reliable information?
You know, next week, let's all come in with chips in our head. Or at least a bag of chips.
On my shoulder.
Chips in our head. All right, listen, the best kind of news is what Rex has always talked about. This is what gets people to buy the newspaper or look at the television or listen to the radio, and that's the Golly Martha.
What's coming now?
I know.
A Maine Coon cat named Mittens accidentally flew 3 times between New Zealand and Australia this month after her cage was mistakenly left in the plane's cargo hold. Mittens was booked on a one-way trip from New Zealand with her owner to their new home in Melbourne, Australia. But Margot Neese waited hours for her cat before learning the plane had returned to New Zealand with Mittens still on board. They were finally reunited after the cat was flown to Australia again. The airline apologized. Neese said her cat was extra cuddly since her travels. Oh, warm Mittens.
I'd click on that.
Absolutely. And with that thought, folks, we have to call an end to this edition of the Media Project. Thank you for bringing us the real story here, David. I tell you,
Film at 11.
this is a classy joint. David Gastina there, our producer, Barbara Lombardo, Judy Patrick, and I'm Rex Smith. We thank you for joining us and hope you'll come back again next week for the Media Project.
They all got tired of patches on their pants. They organized a union to get a living wage. They joined with other actors upon a living stage. Now newspapermen are such interesting people. When they know they've got a people's fight to wage. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, newspaper guild, got a free new world to build. Meet the people, that's
The Media Project is a national production of WAMC, Northeast Public Radio. This week's projectors include former Times Union editor and current Upstate American Substack columnist Rex Smith, Judy Patrick, Vice President for Editorial Development for the New York Press Association and former editor of the Daily Gazette, and Barbara Lombardo, adjunct professor at the University at Albany and former editor of the Saratogian. You can listen to the Media Project anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or anywhere you get your podcasts. I'm your producer, David Gastina. Thanks for listening.
big shots for their dough. Now publishers are such interesting people. It could be prostitution, I don't know. Ting-a-ling-a-ling, circulation, ting-a-ling-a-ling, advertising, get those readers, get that payoff. What a headache, what a mess. Oh, publishers are such interesting people. Let's give 3 cheers for freedom of the press.